Welcome all of you. As you know, this is the Journalism Directors Forum. We get together every Tuesday, and today we have a treat that goes along with our new emphasis, particularly in economic literacy and entrepreneurship. As you all know, the school is committed to making sure that we no longer find charming the notion that journalists would not understand numbers, for example, or how business works. And we also are believing more and more that, unlike the old days when I got my master's degree, and we journalists never thought about how you actually paid for the journalism, or whether indeed anyone really wanted to read it. We thought we were delivering this wonderful material, and it was our debt to society, but somebody else had to worry about those practicalities. So we're definitely not following that line of thinking now. We're asking that all the best minds in journalism think carefully about how journalism is going to be sustained. So it's particularly interesting to welcome Matt Toledo, who is the head of the Los Angeles Business Journal and publisher and CEO. You were named to that position in '94, and so you oversee all the operational and editorial aspects of the media company. In '96, Matt founded and launched the San Fernando Valley Business Journal, and in 2004 he was appointed group publisher of the California Business Journals, which also owns and operates the Orange County Business Journal and the San Diego Business Journal. So that's kind of a broad Southern California perch, and you received numerous awards with LA Business Journal, including from the Society of American Business Editors, among yours. So also, Matt, you are obviously a very active member of the community and currently chairman of the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce, which must be quite time-consuming in itself.
It takes a lot of time.
So I thought we'd just chat a bit, but perhaps you could start simply by talking about how you ended up in business journalism.
Well, terrific. I have actually a couple things that we just talked about, just having a conversation. I actually prepared a few remarks. So I want to launch into a couple of perspectives for everybody's kind of digestion. And we're hoping this will be more of a dialogue, an exchange of ideas. I think this is the most exciting time to be in the news business because it's changed so dramatically in the last, I'd say 10 years, the last 10 years. There's been more change in journalism and news media, not only in terms of, I think, how news is distributed, but also, of course, the economics of running a news enterprise. So I think all of you are involved and hopefully engaged in this, and you're going to find this to be an extremely exciting period of time. I want to make sure we discuss this issue of economic literacy because I think historically, economic coverage or business has not been a focal point for journalists in general, and I'm delighted to hear that there's an emphasis on that in reporting. I'm going to talk about applications of that a little later on in my remarks. I want to give you a little bit of perspective about what I do, talk about the Los Angeles Business Journal, how we're a niche player, and how that compares to other media companies, broadcast. And I want to talk about a little bit about my view on what's going on in the daily newspaper business and the challenges that they're having, and my view about how they're going to earn and work their way out of the difficulty that they're in. And I'm very bullish on the daily newspaper business. I'm very excited about it. And then I want to talk about the idea that information and news is to be free. And I'll have a little debate, potentially in a dialogue, about the merits of whether news and information should be free or not. So can I just launch into all these subjects real quick?
Sounds
and
great.
We'll play a little idea tennis. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
We'll work out here. So just a minute or two on the LA Business Journal and my business. We're a true niche player. We covered, when I say niche, we're just very focused on our market. Our market area in LA is Los Angeles County, and we just cover business. We don't cover what's going on in the Dow Jones. We don't cover what's going on in companies located outside of Los Angeles County. we're very, very narrow in our view, and we believe what we do is done very well. And so we have targeted coverage areas, so our reporters know exactly what they need to go after. If it's business related and it's based in Los Angeles, it's on our radar. And if it's not in those categories, it's not something that needs to be turned over and examined and reported out. That's for another entity. As a result of being a very targeted content producer, we have a very specific and loyal audience of CEOs, political leaders, entrepreneurs that are driving this economy, and they look to us because we provide content in our newspaper that you're not going to get in a Wall Street Journal or other news outlet. And so much to my surprise, the Los Angeles Times has really let us go as a niche player. LA Times could absolutely smash me if they wanted to, and they decided more than a decade ago, although they have they've had plans in the works to smash me, they've never executed on that. The reason I know that, we try to hire some of those people. We get our intelligence that way. But they've really let us alone, and as a result, we have a nice little franchise. We have a very focused content, very loyal audience, and as a result of that, we have an advertising base, which is the financial engine that drives this business. In my business, 85% of the revenue comes from advertising expenditures. 15% is from circulation. And that's been essentially the industry standard for decades. So unique content, loyal audience, and advertisers that are willing to spend a lot of money to reach this audience that help underwrite and fuel that content going forward. So our 4 papers have been fortunate. We've been in business for over 30 years, and we continue to drive our bus going forward. So that's a little bit on us and on niche publishing. Niche versus broadcast. The LA Times is more in the broadcast category, and I think what you're going to see in years going forward is a little more attention and focus on local content and unique content. The way I view the world, let's use this table as an example. You have this line down the middle, and you have what I call commodity content versus unique content. Commodity content is information that, in my judgment, is valueless. There's no value to it, or if there is a value, it's commodity. It's very, very small. Information like the Dow Jones, we're down, 20 points or so on the Dow today, 9,980 or something like that. And I can hear that on KNX as I'm driving around. I'll see it on posting on a website. I'll see it in the LA Times tomorrow. It's anywhere. That information doesn't have a lot of value. But the information that is being reported out this week on the guy that founded Tesla, Elon Musk, his new venture, SpaceX, and the fact that they just sold a bunch of satellites to Northrop. Well, that information is not commodity content. That's unique content, and people will pay for that content because it's not available in any other media outlet. No other media outlet, and whether it's print or otherwise. So I have a very strong view that unique content will always have value. And so when I look at enterprises like the Los Angeles Times, and by the way, I'm not picking on the LA Times during this conversation.
You might after.
I might. They've got some real challenges, and it's very fashionable and popular to be critical, unfortunately, of our daily newspaper. And we really shouldn't do that. We should seek to find ways to, help them, challenge them to do a better job of what they do, so that they become more of a resource and an impact in this community. And I mean that sincerely. But the LA Times, I think, needs to find their footing in providing and doing a better job of providing local content and unique content. They historically had aspirations to be the daily newspaper record, really, with world coverage. And that was maybe an appropriate thing for them to do 20 years ago or so with their bureaus around the world. But really, it doesn't have as much relevance today. You see some of the coverage that they're producing, particularly the last couple of months. The story that they did on the Bell coverage in terms of the politicians and the compensation, that created a lot of stir, created a lot of conversation.
That team was here at the forum last week for Bell.
And I applaud them. I mean, really great coverage, well researched, and that story had legs. There was a lot of follow-on stories, and it helped people kind of, not only in that community, but all communities all around the country, frankly, evaluate what's going on with their elected officials. And that's really great journalism, in my judgment. The stories that they're producing recently about the education of our community, LAUSD, that creates dialogue in the community. And that's where news coverage can have an impact in the community. I think that's what great news advertisers do. My view of the LA Times, as we look forward, and I would say this about the LA Times and frankly any other large daily newspaper. The smaller daily newspapers are doing generally pretty well because they have very niche markets. The big guys, I think what you're going to see is a couple things. Continued erosion of their paid circulation. And I might have this wrong, I'm interested in your reaction. I think the idea that reporters produce news, they file it with their editors, it's reviewed and edited, it's sent to production, then it's sent to a press room, it's run on press, it's put on trucks, it's given to couriers, and it's delivered to your doorstep. I think that's a big process, and it's an expensive process. And I think the printed product, in my view, is a luxury good. That's a luxury when I wake up every morning and I get 3 newspapers dropped on my doorstep. I mean, I feel like a king. You guys probably don't subscribe to the daily newspaper. How many people subscribe to a newspaper and get it in your hands printed? Just a couple, 3, 4. You know, it's a luxury good. And I don't think there's anything wrong with serving a luxury good. But if I were king, I'd be charging a Louis Vuitton price. Because I recognize as a businessman all of the process and expense that goes to delivering that to your doorstep. And my view is that there's, I don't want to say elite, because I don't want anyone to take the wrong impression, but there's a market of people that will pay the price that it costs to produce and get that paper delivered to your doorstep. Everybody else, it should be delivered digitally. We're in the digital age. That's fantastic. But again, if I were king, you pay. And I think, although I will not become king necessarily, I can always hope. I think you're going to see in the next couple of years, most newspapers going to some kind of experimental or permanent paid model. Rupert Murdoch's certainly moving swiftly in that direction. And I think he's on the right track, provided, and it will succeed provided the following. The content has value. Content is not meant to be free. It's meant to be free in terms of how it's distributed. It should be constrained to type on pages. It should be constrained and handcuffed to just being in the printed news product. It should be free in terms of how it's distributed. But it should, if it's good, have value. And if it has value, people will transact. And people will pay to access it, provided one thing. It's unique. If it's not unique, if it's on this side of the table, and it's commodity content, you won't pay for it, because you can get it elsewhere for free. If it's on this side of the table, if it's information that's unique and valuable to you, you will pay. And I think that's where the world's going. That's my perspective on where we're marching forward to. So I think the LA Times is going to have shorter press runs, focus on local content, and if I were them, all I'd focus on is sports, business, politics, arts and entertainment, and then things that move the needle and move the conversation in our community, like the Bell story, like education, like transportation, big things that are really are important to everybody in this marketplace. So that's a little bit my view on what's going on in the daily newspapers, a little bit of background on our business. I want to finish up by spending just a moment to give you a couple ideas on the whole subject of economic literacy and economic reporting. Because I think historically, understanding a balance sheet and understanding how business drives the economy was not particularly interesting or fashionable to reporters. I think reporters, again, historically wanted to find the big scoop, what's going on socially, what's having a social impact. But when you think about stories that have a social impact, I would argue that there's a business component to every social challenge. I'll give you an example that occurred to me when I was visiting with a student last week, a master's student from Berlin. He's doing an analysis of the reporting that's occurred in America right now on immigration. And it's a big issue. It's being wildly debated in D.C., it's California, it's something that impacts us. But very little reporting occurs on the issue of immigration from an economic standpoint. What is the economic impact of immigration? And so here's a great example of a social issue that has a major economic impact. There's a major business story in terms of what immigration and the impact that it has favorably or potentially unfavorably as it relates to our economy. That might not be a sexy story. But I'll tell you, if you tell that story, that will drive more conversation and advance a social issue in a more compelling fashion than an emotional story about immigration. If you'll follow what I'm saying. So I hope you'll take away from this piece of our exchange that if you look at every social story, any story at all, and you challenge yourself to find the economic component, you're going to find an audience, both emotional and logical, that are going to be able to react to it in a way that I think might advance a social issue in a much more compelling fashion. So it's something to think about. With that, I'm open for softballs or hardballs on any of the conversation points that I brought up. And I'm particularly interested in your vision. See, because I'm an old guy. And I have I've been at this for a few years. But I look to you that are studying this right now and are engaged in making an impact, what your vision is for the news media, and where do you think it's going? And where do I have it wrong? Try to bend my view as I try to bend yours. Fair enough? Thoughts? Questions?
Who's got some thoughts about where the news biz is going? Responses to Matt's predictions about the LA Times. Andrew?
Well, I'm just wondering, how do you think that the Times experiment is doing with Murdoch in the UK? Most people have reported that it's in kind of a sad shape, but you seem to think that that's part of the future of what Murdoch's doing.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of experimenting. I think everybody's lacking courage. I think what you have to do is make a full commitment. I mean, at one point, the LA Times made essentially a full commitment to, or daily newspapers, to put all their information online for free. Whether that took courage or not, they did it. I think it's going to take an equal amount of commitment going the other way. And I think there's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of nervous accountants. There's a lot of nervous analysts that are advising CEOs and boards. And there's not a lot of courage. The only person demonstrating real courage right now is Murdoch. But even in Murdoch's house, there are siblings that are in disagreement and aren't particularly marching to the commander's direction. I have confidence that he'll correct that.
Well, the New York Times is moving toward a streaming.
They are moving towards it. Again, for me, it's very slow. I mean, you know, let's just ask the question we're asking. So let's say the LA Times tomorrow announces that starting on Tuesday, because Monday's a holiday, all of the content is going to be blocked. And you have to pay $5 a month to get unlimited content for $5 a month. My view is this. Students won't pay. I get it. In fact, if it were me, I'd make it free for students and teachers. But then there's the rest of the market, people that used to get it delivered to the doorstep, and there are hundreds of thousands of my neighbors and people. They used to get it at the doorstep, and it went from $250 to $150 to $125, to now $52 a year to keep people on. And they said, you know what, I just don't want to spend the money, and I care about the trees, and I don't want to, you know, have you do that. I'll just look at it online. Those people will not pay $5. That's the market going forward. So there's I'm of the view that there's a market that will convert, and there's a market that won't. And I think somebody has to put a line in the sand and walk forward. That's my view. And you're Andrew?
Yes.
Do you see it differently?
Yeah, it's funny because the thing that always, I'm always reminded by the folks who redesigned the Wall Street Journal said that the biggest obstacle for keeping folks as print subscribers is that that pile that grows reminds you how little you've read, or it makes you feel guilty, right? So that's something that is a huge challenge, right? That people cancel not because the newspaper is useful or isn't useful, because they're constantly reminded by how behind they are in reading. And that's something you don't get in the digital edition, right?
You don't get reminded about what a slacker you are.
Right, exactly. But I think your idea of looking at other areas where, for example, you go to the bookstore here, you get software much cheaper as a student, or maybe you give it away for free. As an adult, when you have that extra capital to pay for the product, then you charge those folks. I think your idea is great in terms of letting all EDU domains access this for free, then start paying up.
But I have an evil plan. Because if I give it free to students, which is the right thing to do, and teachers, because they're not going to pay for it anyway, now I have a market. But I can go to the advertising community and say, I have 485,000 people that are going on every day. They're students. Wouldn't you like to reach them, Citibank? So I do have an evil plan about being free.
Right.
There's a way forward. There's a way forward. But free is not sustainable. Free is not sustainable. And what's really exciting, I think the first line I expressed when we sat down is that this is the most exciting time in the news business because it's all changing. I mean, you know, you're not running the LA Times today the same way you ran it for the last 100 years. And 5 years from now, it will not be the same way it is today. It's changing. You know, you don't have this big house, although they still have the building. You don't have this big institution of 600,000 square feet. They use 200,000 square feet of space now. It's all changed.
But something that your conversation doesn't include is that, as you said, you get 85% of your revenue from this.
Yes.
The LA Times, historically, most major newspapers have gotten 75 to 80% from advertising.
Yes.
So, I mean, the thing that is breaking, there are a lot of things that are breaking, but the preeminent thing that has been breaking that affects them economically is that connection, the sort of automatic connection between the advertisers who are buying the eyeballs.
Yes.
And so the question of what you charge for content becomes a lot more important, but it's important to add into that conversation the fact that they never really charged anything like, you know, what the cost of the newspaper was to the actual subscriber. It was always people used to call me when I was at a newspaper and say, oh, by God, I'm paying for this thing. I didn't, you know, I thought, are you kidding? You're a measly quarter?
That's not a threat.
But, you know, so that, I mean, I think historically that's been an interesting fact because it wasn't really the primary focus of the journalist's attention who had the economic power. So that makes it, in some ways, it makes it even harder for newspapers to all of a sudden start charging people, you know, for the content. They never have really charged people anything like the cost of the content. It doesn't mean they shouldn't, but I think that's a factor in the hesitation. And
Well,
people haven't felt like they needed to pay for it. They got it free on television, you know. They now started paying with cable, but I mean, we really have trained American consumers of news to believe, essentially, that it would come their way, and they weren't. They weren't responsible.
But it used to not be free. The newspaper 20 years ago was not free. The content was not free.
It wasn't free, although they paid nothing like the amount of freight that the advertisers paid.
Advertisers are subscribers.
Subscribers paid nothing like the amount of freight that the advertisers did.
That's true.
Subscribers
That's true. That
paid a
hasn't
tiny little
changed.
fraction.
That's still the same.
Right.
So you're suggesting that my plan is flawed because
I'm not, it's not so much that I'm suggesting it's flawed, it's that I think we need to take that into consideration when we think about what consumers are willing to do. We've essentially been training consumers consumers to believe that they just don't have to pay much money. So it makes a big cultural shift for them to decide to do it.
Well, people don't have to pay for water, but they do because of how they got it. So I can go to the tap and get water. One could argue that the water is better, potentially, than this. I'm trying to put the water back in the bottle because the water's just been spilled out. I'm trying to put the water back in the bottle, and the only way I'll succeed is if I demonstrate that this water is unique and is better than the water of the tap. And that's a journalistic change. If my content that I produce is unique and valuable, I can put the water back in the bottle and I can sell it. If it's not unique and valuable, if it's commodity content that can be perceived someplace else, I'm toast. That's how I see it. That's how I see it.
So, yeah.
I kind of want to touch on that. My name's Laura. I'm
Hi, Laura.
print.
You're going to attack me, I can tell. You're going to just...
I'm a print and digital journalism major because we just switched that up.
Andrew was softball compared to you. I can
You know, something that my generation really likes to do is disseminate information across the web. You know, like everyone shares stories on Facebook, everyone posts things on their blog or their Twitters. So if you're charging for content and you're putting up a wall that blocks everything, or if you're giving it free to students, either way, like if we have free access to this content, how can you stop people from just posting it online for free somewhere else?
It's a great question. I don't know. I mean, part of my just general reaction is I want to say I want people to forward my content. And I don't know why I'd have an issue with that. Just like when you buy a newspaper now and you want to share it with Pat, you walk over and say, hey, check this article out. So kind of gut check. I don't have an issue with that. As long as someone's paying once. I like the idea of the elevating of my brand, the sharing of content, and what that does for me. I don't know if I'd have difficulty with that.
But even if like those people might have been subscribers otherwise, but they know that they can find the content free
That doesn't
somewhere
bother
else.
me. That's like people going to the library in the old days, my generation, is that, well gosh, why do I have to pay a quarter for it when I can walk down to the public library and get it? And my view is that's perfectly fine. Sharing, and if I make it, this is all about utility. I'm going to charge a really big price to get it delivered to your doorstep. I'm going to charge a very small price to access it digitally. And if you want to share it, if you want to go to the public library, if you want to consume it that way, I don't have an issue with that. In theory, I don't know why I have an issue with that.
So long as they keep your brand attached to.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because if it's a tweet, then it's going to be so small that it's probably commodity. But if it's a longer article,
Yeah.
keep your brand attached.
I just want to elevate my brand.
Well, the tweet will link.
The tweet will link to the story.
Right, but if someone didn't
Right.
want to, then you're losing brand.
That's a really, I think that's something to be figured out, but my gut reaction to it is I got to figure out how to embrace that versus protect that. That's my view. I think Murdoch would probably disagree with me. I think he'd be harder than me on that one.
I think I'm in agreement with you that unique
What's
content.
your name?
I'm Pat. I'm a master's student in the journalism school here. I agree with you that unique content is the best way to demonstrate value. But do you think that means that journalists, in order to create more unique content, should become specialized, to become more knowledgeable about?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm really critical of most journalists. You know, I think, and I'm sorry, I realize I'm against the whole army here.
Well, you're one too, so you can.
Here's my view. Specialization is very important. I think to really know a subject empowers journalists so much. One of the criticisms that we even get in my paper, even though my guys are, they have their beat assignments, is, I'll have somebody at a bank say, I sat down with so-and-so for 90 minutes, and I gave them all the information, gave them an education 101 in banking. And you want to have journalists that understand banking, that are covering banking, that really get it, that know what's going on, and are finding the great stories to change the world. Not somebody who's in banking that has to learn about banking and stumbles over it. No, you have to have specialization, I think. And the best quality of the best reporters is curiosity and intelligence. I mean, you can't teach that. You can't teach somebody to be smart, and you can't teach them to be curious. But I'll tell you, pound for pound, year after year in this business, those are the two most important qualities. Oh, and by the way, nice. Smart, curious, and nice. Three top qualities.
I don't think these folks would be an army against the notion of specialization at all. We have a lot of, among our faculty members are, science journalists and education reporters. I think that's, in fact, one of the riches of the school.
What do you guys think about, we'll get to the question second. Can I jump in?
Yours first.
Okay. What do you guys think about blogs?
Depends on the blog.
Yeah.
Exactly. A blog is just that's like saying, what do you think about telephone calls?
I think they could be a way of demonstrating your understanding of a subject, or exposing your ignorance.
How many of you have blogs? They're your blogs. Okay. The reason I ask is I think I have a point of view. Surprise. I think blogs have had their moment in the spotlight. I think most people that are playing in that space have either established themselves or not. I think it was very fatty a couple of years ago. I don't see it anymore. But I think there's something to be said for creating voice. There's a lot to be said for creating brand you. And I don't know who said it, demonstrating ability or specialty. Somebody said that. That's really good. But in terms of a distribution of information, I'm not sure how that is.
Oh, yeah, it's my question. We were talking a lot earlier. My name is Ryan. I'm a master's student also, first year. And my question is about the paywalls that we were talking about earlier. And that I don't think that necessarily fixes the whole problem of the business of journalism, because like you were saying, most revenue comes from advertisements. And that's dwindling also, so how do we fix that problem?
Yeah, well, the advertising, it's funny, the news business, we're staying on the dailies for a second, really got killed because you have this transformation of what's going on in the industry. At the same time, you have a horrible economy. So you have declining circulation, figuring out how to fly the plane when it's broken, and declining ad dollars at the same time. It's really a disaster. So I'm bullish on advertising going forward. I also think that you can drive the advertising prices higher. There's been a lot of discounting in the business side of this business for a long time. And I think, again, publishers have lacked courage to drive price. So I'm very bullish on that side of the business. I think that's going to take care of itself. And I think that's, we're seeing our small businesses, I'm seeing it, and the intelligence I'm getting at the Times, they're seeing the same thing. I think that's going to cure itself. But I'm not answering your question on it.
Oh, maybe yes, actually. Because I was just asking mostly how do we fix the advertising side of the problem.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think it's currently taking care of itself. The one thing that's definitely different in this business today, and I can't see beyond like 3 years. I can see like next couple of years pretty clearly. 5's fuzzy, beyond that, who knows. The difference today in this business versus 10 years ago is you're not going to have the profit margins the daily newspapers used to enjoy. You can enjoy 20, 25% profit margin. That's a great business. You're printing dough. It's almost embarrassing. And so, newspapers that are well run are going to make, anywhere from 8 to 15% profit margin. That's still good business. I talked to Brian Greenspan, media company. They own the Vegas Daily Newspaper and a bunch of other media companies. He said, I'm real happy making 5%. If we're doing a great job serving our market and we're delivering value to our readers, I don't care whether I make 5 or 10%. This is a business guy. It's not a journalist. I think that's the other reality. So that as you bend through what's going on in the media business, and particularly in the daily newspaper, you're just finding that it's a different business tomorrow than it was 20 years ago. And investors and owners have to realize that.
And the effect on salaries for journalists also will probably be a piece of that. What about the job market?
Let me circle back. Let me react first to your notion about the salaries for journalists. And I'll tell you my experience. I pay for quality. And I have some really good reporters. And I'll keep paying them more and more and more because I want them to do it. Culturally, reporters are being paid differently today than they were, 5 years ago. There's been a lot of layoffs that have been well reported. There's probably going to be more layoffs. There's going to be smaller newsrooms still in the big dailies. But the people that will stay there, the people that are good reporters, that have those 3 attributes that I spoke about, are going to do well. Because they will go down the street if where they're working now doesn't compensate them. Great journalists are scarce. I'm here to tell you. I have about, 80 reporters, 70 reporters throughout my papers. And I'll pay the quality. And I'm sure any other publisher, if they're all mediocre rather than that's the same thing. So you're having smaller newsrooms, I think better quality journalists, and paid accordingly. That's how I see it as a publisher.
Maybe more likely in business publications and in niche publications than general. But who knows?
Well, I think Russ Stanton, I'm thinking now of the LA Times, his budget is being constrained. And I think he's a logical human being, like all of us are. And he'd rather have few reporters and pay the fewer reporters he has more money and keep them and have them produce great content than have a bigger newsroom. I think that's the challenge and the bend that all of us are going through right now. That's how I see it. I'm not sure making another point.
I was asking you about the job market. Are you bullish on the economy's revival and
for journalists or for the economy in general?
Well,
I have perspectives on both.
both.
Unemployment's going to stay at 12-ish% for a while. It's going to be really slow in terms of recovery. I mean, really slow, like years. We used to have unemployment rates, 5, 6%. I'd say I said a moment ago, I can see 3 years out, but not 5. I can't see when we're going to have 600% unemployment. I love this country. I think it's one of the best countries on the planet. But this country is not accelerating. We are not continuing to decline, but we're not having the progress that other countries around the world are having. And it's going to be a very long and slow recovery. We're going to be looking back 20 years from now going, where was the recovery? That's not saying it's going to take 20 years to make it happen. I'm just saying it's going to. I believe this is unlike any other period that I've known in my lifetime. So I'm bearish on what's going on from a job standpoint. And I think the recovery is going to be very slow. Journalists, what you heard me say, and I'll just punctuate, it's all about talent. People that have high energy, are very intelligent, want to sniff out the great story and tell them, you're going to have great prospects. It's a challenge because newsrooms aren't expanding like they're contracting. And the other thing that you're missing out on is about 9 years ago, you had the .com thing, or 10, 12 years ago. You guys are all in grade school. You had websites that needed content, and they drove up the prices. Do you follow? You had all these websites that are being born out of Silicon Valley. There were all these neat zips things and all that stuff, and they needed to produce content to put it on their site. And so they hired my reporters, and reporters from the LA Times, and all these reporters, and I had to keep paying more to keep my reporters. And they didn't care because they had VC money, so they didn't care. I'll spend $100,000 for a reporter. We need $500,000 more because we need 5 more reporters. And everyone's going, woo, they're in the money. Those days are gone. So unless something else,
We
something,
still have websites that, we have more websites that are producing that.
but you don't have the BC, sudsy, just get it done now kind of spending that you had back in that period of time. It was foolish, crazy money. Now you have sensible money. And so as journalists, you don't benefit from that. You're gonna kill me.
No, I actually am not. I am wondering, I'm an undergrad, so I'm going to be out looking for work in like about a year, a little more than a year. And I'm wondering, I mean, it sounds like it's easier, and I'm seeing a lot of job postings for like mid-level jobs. A lot of papers are trying to hire people who have experience
Right.
in the industry already, but what does that mean for people who are just starting out?
Yeah, you need to be an intern.
Yeah, I mean, but like beyond that, like, you know, having 3 to 4 years in the workplace, like, is interning really the best thing?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely the best thing. I'm not pitching us, but as an example, we have interns at our shop, and we frequently will hire the interns that work in our papers. We road test you, and we'll give you opportunities to, do some writing, do some reporting, and, start, filling your book, and we see how you do. And look for those 3 qualities and lots of energy, and we end up hiring. And I know that the only time used to be the same way. I don't know what they're doing currently, but the best thing for you to do is figure out who has the values and the culture where I want to be around, and then do whatever it takes to get a job as an intern at that enterprise. But make sure they have those qualities. Who has the values and culture that I want, and then just kill for it. You got to be better than the other guy. That's what it's all about. Absent that, I think it's really challenging. Sending out your resume, doing it cold, that's tough in this job market. And referrals make a big difference. I mean, I'll tell you, I got, we have two boxes, referred and unreferred. Unreferred is like this, referred is like this. And then you have interns that are on the inside track. So inside track, pretty helpful, probably not going to happen. This will get a read, but it won't probably get more than a read. These will get serious consideration because it's referred, and this is the best shot. Got like 10 more minutes.
Other
I'm running out of
questions
material.
or comments? You can assess Matt's idea of the future of the LA Times.
I'll throw something out there. How does one without an economic background become economically literate?
You've come to the right place. Take Gabe Kahn's course.
All right.
Gabriel Kahn, who's going to be, you probably know Gabe, he was the
Yeah.
Wall Street journalist, public bureau chief of teaching.
You need to start studying it formally and informally. You need to start, the way I would do it is I'd start playing a mental game where when you look at a business, just walking down the street or on vacation, you go, how do these guys make money? How much money do they make? And you take a number 2 pencil out and you go, okay, so they got this many customers and their average revenue is that. And start, it's a puzzle. It's a Rubik's Cube. And if you start training yourself to play with the Rubik's Cube, you're going to cultivate and form in your mind points of view about how it works. And you're going to formulate great questions. And great questions lead to great reporting. So I would start having those mental exercises. Formal training and the kind of informal, I'm teaching myself. All of you, I'm sure, have had the experience that the things you know that you really know, you've taught yourself. Whether it's a software application, something in life, it's the things that you kind of wrestled through and found your own answer. And so if you really want to be good, then you have to start putting yourself in the game before you're in the game. And you get it your own way. Then you're strong, internally. Good.
And it keys off with intelligence and curiosity.
It does indeed. Demonstrates those 3 things. Well, 2 of the 3 things.
Nice is a new attribute for reporters.
Well, I don't mean this to sound funny, but some reporters are surly.
That's what I mean.
I was just trying to punctuate. Other thoughts or questions?
As a publisher, in terms of going after ad dollars, is there a particular industry where you see more potential in terms of, again, purely going after ad dollars? And the other question is, what format do you see as a lucrative format for ads that either run online? Meaning, is it a banner? Is it a commercial that comes before a video of one of your reporters?
Great question. Let me answer the last one first.
Okay.
Advertising, whether it's in print or on a website, is a really difficult thing to kind of put in one right answer. An integrated approach is critical for any company. So there's not like one, this size banner works best, or an essential like this. There's not one kind of method that works best, but having, I'll make two comments about the advertising side. Having an integrated approach, which definition of integration is, it's print, it's electronic, it's brochures, it's direct mail, it's a variety of channels of communication. And then the other one is frequency. Advertising in my paper one time will not have an impact on the advertiser's business. Advertising in my paper each week for a year, that'll have an impact on the business that's advertising in my paper. So frequency is essential. Frequency and then this kind of fragmentation is critical. I wanted to circle back on a couple other things that you bring to mind. One, to punctuate in relation to my business, and I think all well-run news enterprises, and that's to have the separation between the business side, the advertising side, and the journalistic side. There was a fellow that was the publisher of the LA Times about 15, 14 years ago named Mark Willis. Mark Willis, right? Came from Kellogg, I think, if my memory's right. And he had this vision that you had to blend the advertising executives and the editors, and you had to bring them together, to work together, to find ways to produce content that was valuable to the reader, but also was good for the paper. Total disaster. I've always believed that you should produce journalistically a great news product that's relevant and valuable to your audience. And if you do that, you'll have advertisers that want to reach that audience. But blending the two is not a model for success, and I think he proved that. I don't mean that to poke him in the eye, but it just that was not a win. So I think it's very important. I mean, if any of you identify an enterprise, I'll talk about culture and value. If there's not that foundational element, run. I mean, it's just a non-starter. It's not the kind of place you want to be. It's not an honorable way to be doing work, in my opinion.
Well, could I just add that may have to do in part with scale. I mean, there are a lot of web-based news outlets where the people who are doing very honorable journalism are the same people who have to figure out how the thing is sustained. So I would be hesitant.
I don't like it.
Well, you may not. I would be hesitant to say that what happened with Mark Willis in a very different era would be scalable to this era as a perfect predictor of whether somebody's doing honorable work. I mean, it's just a very, there are a lot of things that Mark Willis did that were unfeeling as hell. They called him the serial killer for C-E-R-E-A-L. Anyway, but I think nowadays there is a different modus operandi in emerging media, and to say that anybody is having to worry about how they're going to pay the bills, even as they worry about the quality of the journalism, is not honorable. It strikes me as overt.
Well, I want to push you on that, politely or respectfully.
And nicely.
So I view the people in this room to be extra special. And when I look at, and I understand what you're saying, there are trade publications and there's other outlets where there's less of a separation between the business side and the news side. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm talking about scale. I'm talking about small, upstart,
Okay.
web-based news organizations, which, by the way, are hiring people also, which, you know, we're talking, this is a much greater diversity today in the landscape in terms of who's producing what we might call journalism. And the smaller ones are not likely to have a big wall separating all these people over here to worry about how the thing is going to be sustained. Think something like the Voice of San Diego, which is doing very interesting work, and the guy who heads it has to, you know, have some of the same people worrying about whether they're going to have a community event and how the money's going to be made at the community event. It doesn't mean that the journalism is this.
Okay, great. So, great. I'm glad you made the point of clarification. And I'm fearful I'll never be invited back now that I've been.
No, I'm just expanding
But,
the conversation.
So I think we're in agreement. We wouldn't want to have the publisher or the editor saying, hey, these folks are big advertisers to our, and relevant to our sustainability. We should cover them.
Right.
Are we saying the same thing?
Of course, but I mean, I have to say, having sat at those tables, it always was very nice to act as if no publisher ever suggested that.
This one never did that.
Yeah, well, that's very honorable, and a lot of publishers have been very honorable, but it's not as if none of that ever happened beside Mark Willis.
I know, but what I'm trying to tell all of us assembled here
Is it?
is
Don't do it.
run
Yes.
from that. I agree it's there, but what I'm urging you, I'm holding you to a higher standard. I'm holding you capable of choosing. You know, it's like getting married. You know, you can marry anybody, but you want to marry the right person. So what I'm saying is, as you look forward, if you feel like, you know, this kind of feels funny, it's funny. And I'm urging you to have courage and have strength and wait to marry the right person, rather than getting married just because, you know, you need to check the box. So I think we're in agreement, right? That's
sure
what we should try to do that.
Try to marry the right person, we're definitely doing.
But that there are people that you should marry that are out there, and some people do that. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but what I guess I'm trying to telegraph. And now you're crossing your arms and everything. What I'm trying to telegraph, and I'm not trying to hold myself up, but there is honor, and it does exist, and we should seek it, and we should seek to do great work that's meaningful, and not be pushed around by what is commercially productive. That doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want, because you have to produce content that is relevant for the institution who pays your check. That's what I'm saying. You're mad.
I'm all for honor. No.
As you said that journalist needs to be specialized in like a very specific category.
Yes.
What do you suggest for journalists who are just starting out, like they're still not sure what
It's a
to
great
do?
question. It's a great question. It's a great question, and I actually have an answer to that. Because there is a specific area that you should all focus on. I have all their attention now. It's the first time. It's the category you're most passionate about. It's the category you're most passionate about. Some people are very interested in law. Right. Some people are very interested in the green revolution. Right. Some people are very interested in social issues, gay and lesbian, finance. I don't care what it is. But you should choose to become a specialist in an area that you already have a passion about, rather than cultivate an interest in something that might be commercially marketable, but it's not really your passion. You should find your passion, and you should choose to dig in and train yourself and do great reporting and find great stories within that sector. Then your life has purpose. And then you'll write stories that have an impact. That isn't that what this is all about? Making an impact in the world? Having a purpose? I say yes. I say yes. We're running out of time.
I've got one last question for you. Do you charge for your website? And are you kind of looking toward a more consumer-focused website, did I hear?
You're catching me at an embarrassing moment. We currently do not charge. I am very aggressive this week, next week, working on with our designers and our digital folks to get our paywall up. It's just a fluke. We launched this site a few months ago and it didn't have the technology, blah, blah, blah. So we are a paid site. To answer your question, we are a fully paid site. And you have to be a paid subscriber. It's $100 a year to get our content.
Oh.
And I think we're
Free
missing
to
out.
students?
No, but it's a great question. It's only $1 for students
For the year.
for the year.
Wow.
Yeah. It's only
Okay,
$1.
that's cool.
I mean, that's basically
All right.
Okay, thank
Is
you.
it based on their .edu? I mean, how do you?
You just have to demonstrate the registered student.
I see.
And just so you know, it's $30 if you're at UCLA. It's only $1. I'm serious. I'm just saying.
That's nice. All right, well, please join me in thanking Matt.
Well, this has been a lot of fun for me. Thanks for your time and attention, and I look forward to seeing all of you in my office time for internship.
Andrew.
Yeah. Good day, everybody. Thank you.